Hello and welcome to another Tyrrell's Classic Workshop. Well, it's been a while since we featured a car, which is a position I never thought I'd find myself in, but what a car to feature. Not the most exotic or coveted car in the world or the fastest car, but one of my own personal favourites. It's the most exotic car you've never heard of. It's the Fiat 130 Coupé. It sounds very nondescript, very ordinary, but it wasn't actually. It's absolutely steeped in Italian thoroughbredness and esotericness, if such words exist. And it's just a thing of absolute beauty if you put it into context. When I was 19, there were two restaurateurs, two hotel owners local to me in my hometown of Wallasey, and they both had blue metallic Fiat 130 coupés. And I thought these were absolutely beautiful cars. I didn't know a lot about them, but styling wise, they were just stunning. That started my journey really with Italian cars, I would say. And I managed to purchase one of them. They traded them in for another car. I managed to purchase one later on for the princely sum of £2,000. I borrowed some money, I took a long-term loan, and I financed myself to buy a 130 Coupé. And it was another one, but it was blue metallic, same colour as this, which is one of the nicest colours for this car. I think it's simply called Azzurro Metallizzato, blue metallic in Fiat 130 speak. And the more I looked into it, the more I realised that this was a very interesting and very special car. We'll start with the engine, why not? It's Italian. It's a 3.2 litre V6, cast iron block, cast aluminium cylinder heads, same as a Ferrari Dino 246 conceptually. And in fact, the bottom end of the engine, even though it's 3.2 litre and far less highly tuned than a Dino engine, is very, very similar. And that is no coincidence. This car has got its roots in Ferrari Formula One history because the designer of the engine was a chap called Aurelio Lampredi, and his history was with Ferrari in the 1950s. He started working for Enzo Ferrari in 1950, and he was responsible for designing the Ferrari Formula One engines. Giacomo Colombo was the Ferrari staple engine designer up to that point. He devised the 3 litre V12, or became the 3 litre, and we've got two of his engines in here, two Ferrari 250 GTs with that engine, and that kept Ferrari going for years, their production and competition cars. 250 GTO, of course, famously, as one example. Probably the most valuable classic car in the world. What was happening was Ferrari weren't winning. They tried all sorts of things, supercharging their small V12, and it didn't work. So Enzo Ferrari got Aurelio Lampredi. He hired him to completely revise the Formula One strategy for Ferrari in the 1950s, which he did, and it worked. And he came out with a big V12 engine by Ferrari standards, huge, up to 4.5 litres. And in 1952, it was developing 380 brake horsepower, which was a monstrous figure for an engine in the early 1950s. So, Aurelio Lampredi leaves Ferrari round about 1960, I think, and he starts to work for Fiat. He becomes the engine designer at Fiat. Bit of a downgrade, you would say. Well, yes, understandably. The car is what I would call a curate's egg because it's incredibly exotic and esoteric on the one side, but a bit of a misfit on the other. So it has got beautiful Pininfarina styling. It was hand-built in the Pininfarina factory for Fiat. It was exquisitely trimmed and designed inside and out. It's a very, very good mechanical concept. So why wasn't it more successful, and why wasn't it more heard of? Well, of course, it's always going to be handicapped by the fact that it's called a Fiat, particularly a 130, nothing extraordinary, just another number in their model lineup at the time. But I think Italian politics were in play here. And that's one of the reasons why this car was destined to always be an also-ran. The landscape in Italy in the late 60s and early 70s was terribly traumatic. People were being abducted, kidnapped, shot, held for ransom, and it wasn't the done thing to be seen in too flashy a car for that reason. So in that respect, it's a beautiful automobile, but it's very subtly styled and downplayed. But that's part of its charm, actually, because it has an elegance of form that is quite unique. But by the same token, it's got this beautiful V6 engine, this sort of, engine designed by an ex-Formula One engine designer. But why does it only develop 50 brake horsepower a litre, 100 or thereabouts, 165 brake horsepower for 3.2 litres? It's crazy. The car can obviously handle more power. It's got the presence and the gravitas to carry it off. But I think the reason was Ferrari by this time was owned by Fiat, the road car division, and they simply didn't want a car that took too many Ferrari customers away. So that's why they capped it at a woefully low maximum speed of 118 miles an hour for the manual, when it could easily have been far more than that. And the engine has got all sorts of beauty about it. Pedigree, the architecture of the engine is, it's very, very clever. It's got beautiful extractor exhaust manifolds and a lovely exhaust system. Single overhead camshaft, quite lightweight alloy heads. And it's also one of the first cars to have a toothed rubber cam belt. Fiat Aurelio Lampredi designed the 124 twin cam engine, which was revolutionary in the late 1960s. And to my knowledge, that was the first ever car to have a cam belt, because the belt is cheaper, it can be easily changed comparatively than a chain, and it's less noisy. Of course, Ferrari started to use them with the 308 GT4 in 1974, I think. There were lots of different things, lots of high-tech things. The suspension was revolutionary. The whole package was wonderful, except for the fact it was just not very fast. And it sounded glorious. The exhaust system was tuned, as we'll hear later when we take it out, was tuned very similar to an Alfa Romeo Alfa Sud of the time, to give that lovely raspiness, that raughtiness. And in fact, I used to enjoy driving through the Mersey Tunnel near Wallasey just to hear the car, the exhaust reverberating round. This started, as I say, my journey with Italian cars and working on them. And I thought to myself, wow, if this is what a V6 sounds like, a V12, such as a Daytona, must sound utterly amazing. And I would go as far as to say, this car and the noise it made spoiled me for Ferraris and things, because, okay, a Ferrari Daytona, which I worked on first in 1986, was and is a wonderful car. I love them, but the exhaust sound didn't blow me away after this. A humble V6, strange to say, but that's just my experience. I was expecting something amazing, and it was actually quite subdued by comparison, really. Not in terms of noise, just in terms of different frequencies and sonorousness, if such an expression exists. I fell in love with the 130 Coupe when I was 19. I've actually had 4 of them, but that was the only one that worked. I've had 3 others over the years to try and bring them back to life, but it never happened. It was a dream. So we've got this car coming to the workshop. But what is interesting about this car is, this car actually has been worked on by a guy who unfortunately has passed away now, called Guy Croft, who was very clever at unleashing more potential in Fiat engines, and this was absolutely ripe for it. What he's done is restored some of the power that should have been there in the first place. This engine in this car is developing well over 200 brake horsepower, which doesn't sound a lot, but this is 50 years ago, and the car weighs 1,500 kilos, which is not a massive amount by modern car standards. I'd venture to say a Mini Countryman probably weighs 1,500 kilos, but anyway, I'm going to look at some of the things before we take this car for a run and see what the potential of the 130 Coupe could have been. I'm going to look at some of the reasons why I believe Fiat deliberately reined it in because of the fact that Ferrari was looking over their shoulder and ready to pick them up for anything. So most of them that came to the UK had automatic gearboxes, because automatic gearboxes were perceived as luxury in the 1970s. Rolls-Royce, Jaguar V12, apart from the early XJSs, you couldn't get a manual gearbox. But it's the price that is the really shocking thing. Before we move on to the technical bit, I must share this. I'm just going to pick up a motor show review here, and let's have a look at the prices. Okay. Well, this is a motor show review from 1972, just about the time the 130 Coupe was launched. And we'll start with this. We have a Jaguar XJ12, which we have to remember was one of the finest saloon cars or production cars in the world at that time. And assuming that the Lucas Prince of Darkness, as they were called, electrics, could actually stand the heat and not have to leave the kitchen or the engine compartment, this thing would do 140 miles an hour with a beautiful V12 engine. I mean, a very highly respected and credible car. And that car was £3,726 in 1972. Fiat 130 Coupe, £5,257. Over 40% more expensive than a Jaguar XJ12. Stupendously expensive in the UK. They made 4,200 of these 130 coupes, very few of them right-hand drive, and to my knowledge, I don't think they made a factory manual gearbox right-hand drive version. They were all automatic. So one of the things that this car has had done to it is it's had a manual gearbox transplant put in it, and it makes a lot of difference because you lose all that slack in the drive train with the automatic gearbox, torque converter, etc. So the other reason why this car is different is the induction system. So let's have a look, first of all, at a standard 130 Coupe. Well, we get to the rub of the matter here. Here's another 130 Coupe that we coincidentally happen to have here with a standard setup in the engine. And of course, any engine is basically a big air pump. The more air you can pump through it, combust, and get out of it as quickly as possible, the more power. It's directly proportional to how much power the engine produces. So whenever an engine tuner is looking at an engine to tune, we're always looking for the weakest link, where the maximum percentage gains in airflow and power can be achieved. And the 130 Coupe, one of the reasons I believe why this was deliberately done on the 130 Coupe was this small carburettor in the middle here. And you've got these two small Venturis. There's a big air filter goes on here. But that's it. That's all the air that's allowed to get into this engine at up to 6,500 revs. That is a tiny amount of air. And I would go as far as to say the engine is throttled. It's actually restricted because of that single carburettor. And the likes of a Ferrari Dino 246, obviously the architecture of the engine is different at the top end. They have a traditional 4-cam layout, but they have 3 of these in a line. And if 3 of those were fitted to it to allow a lot more airflow through, it would make the world of difference to the engine. Just that one thing. A little bit of work on the heads, porting to let more airflow through, maybe bigger valves, etc., would also reap results. Good news, that's exactly what's been done to the blue one. So let's go and have a look at that. Well, to give as a measure of how fond I am of these cars, here is an original Fiat factory workshop manual for the 130. The interesting thing about this is it is incredibly simple and informative. Having started my working life working on Rolls-Royces and Bentleys, their workshop manuals are very wordy and very verbose. This one is incredibly straightforward, and it's written in plain English, and it absolutely hits the nail on the head. I've got a big library of publications like this, but I'm very happy to have this, and I suspect there aren't too many of them left in the world. Well, this car is not in pristine condition. It's very nice, actually, as they go, and it's one of the first in the UK. So it's a miracle that it's survived, because these cars rusted like there was no tomorrow. You could almost hear them fizzing with the ferrous oxide taking place, but be that as it may, this particular engine has had the triple carburettor setup put on it by Guy Croft, which is something I always wanted to do but never got round to. Unfortunately, he has passed away, but he obviously did great work on these things, and this makes such a huge difference to the engine, the gas flow that I was talking about earlier. And you've got these lovely extractor exhaust manifolds all ready to help the exhaust gases leave. And if I just pull one of these air filter covers off very carefully, then we will see that we've basically got 3 for the price of, not for the price of, but for the space of 1. There we are. Very similar setup to the 1 carburettor in the middle, but we've actually trebled the amount of gas flow effectively. It doesn't quite work like that in practice, but we've certainly made a big difference to the power that this engine produces, and I expect Mr. Croft worked his magic a bit inside as well. But it will be very interesting to see how this car performs on the road, and very interesting to see what it sounds like. So let's go and do that. I've tuned it using my traditional hosepipe and screwdriver method. We haven't got time, I've been blethering on for too long, so we haven't got time to show you that, but have a look at another video, Alfa Romeo or the last one I think was the one I tuned. If you want to see that happening, let's get on with it and get on the road. Well, this is the first time I've driven on a public road a Fiat 130 Coupe since I was 19. So this is quite a trip down memory lane. I will come clean and say it's 40 years actually. And there's one or two things which become very obvious. One is that we got a driveline vibration of some sort. This car has come in really for a good sort out. It's not something I would normally do, but I'm in the fortunate position that I can pick and choose a little bit some of the jobs. Well, no, I can pick and choose some of the jobs that we do. So I've sort of managed to tap into this car, and it is just incredible, the feeling of 40 years since I last did this. It's astonishing. But I mean, I'm just poodling around at the moment, waiting for the car to warm up. But it just feels lovely. Leonard Setright, sort of one of the most famous motoring journalists of his era, said in the 70s that this car was one of the finest handling cars he had ever driven. In other words, the weighting of the controls, the way the car just sits on the road, what's going to happen at the limit, and I know all about what happens at the limit because I actually wrote off my Fiat 130 Coupe when I was 19 like a complete fool. I had a slight altercation with a very fixed lamppost, unfortunately. Through losing control, trying to be clever. But it is just so, the car shrinks around you. I know that's a cliche, but it doesn't feel like a big lolloping car. I mean, there's no body roll. Just great. I'm very happy to be back here, I have to say. And it is amazing how much sharper it feels just for a manual gearbox. The automatic that was fitted, the Borg-Warner Y12, like so many automatic gearboxes in the 70s, was a slush-o-matic. The torque converter had so much freewheeling effect in it. You can obviously buy kits to upgrade the likes of the GM 400, the Turbo Hydromatic 400 automatic transmission. It was used in Bentleys, Rolls Royces, a lot of American cars, obviously Chryslers, but you can actually get rid of the slushiness now. But nevertheless, the 130 Coupe automatic in standard trim with the single carburettor was not a fast car, even though it sounded glorious. And the way they engineered the exhaust system to sound like an Alfa Romeo Alfa Sud or something with that beautiful rasp, I am going to look into the science of how that happened, because there has to be a reason. The gear lever's down here somewhere. There has to be a reason for that, and I would like to know what it is that causes that lovely resonance, that lovely rasping in the exhaust. Now that it's opened up a bit, I am going to open it up a bit. Let's get some of that exhaust magic on tape or something. Oh, that is lovely. As I said earlier, the car was sort of positioned in an interesting place in the marketplace. It was marketed as an auto-only car, I believe, in the UK. I've never seen a UK spec right-hand drive manual car, but it was because automatic transmissions were associated with prestige cars in the 1970s, to a large extent, luxury cars anyway, not sports cars of course, and Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Jaguar in the V12, Mercedes-Benz in their S-Class never offered a manual option in the UK. It was always the automatic, the only exception being the manual Jaguar XJS before anybody jumps down my throat, which they marketed for a couple of years when they brought the XJS out in 1975, but hardly anybody bought them, which sort of underlines my point really. But yeah. One of the delights of this velour, this Tyrrell upholstery, is it actually keeps you in place. Not that we're pulling massive G-forces, but it's so much better than a leather seat for actually locating you. And the driving position is good. It's slightly short legs, long arms, but oh, this is lovely. It really is. It's those triple carburettors, which, as I mentioned earlier, were the strangling point of the engine, really, the throttling, literally, of the engine's capabilities. With those replaced for a triple carburettor setup, which is what it needed for proper power and gas flow and noise, it just makes all the difference. I suspect we need to do something with the dampers on this car as well. It's a little bit fast and loose with its body control, but we can do that. I'm determined to make this car work properly because of my history with them. But one of the delights for me, my hometown is Wallasey on the Wirral. When I was living there, we weren't a million miles away. Wallasey is next to the Wallasey Mersey Tunnel, which goes through to Liverpool under the River Mersey. And one of the things I used to very much enjoy was driving my 130 Coupe with the single carburettor, with the standard exhaust, with automatic transmission through the Mersey Tunnel, because it made the most glorious noise reverberating off the tunnel walls and ceiling. So what I'm going to do, for various reasons, due to time, etc., I can't actually drive this car to the Mersey Tunnel today. It's about 30 miles away from here, something like that. But what I have found is an empty warehouse. So we're going to take this car into the empty warehouse and we're going to see how it sounds in a tunnel-like atmosphere. The original 130 Coupe sounded beautiful. This should sound wonderful with those very non-restricted air filters and that lovely exhaust. Let's see if we can make some music. It's as old as the hills. Driving your car into a tunnel and through a tunnel to hear the engine noise, something electric car owners can only dream of. Let's see if we can get that noise, that sweet spot of 130 experience. And the manual transmission 130 coupes, which most of them on the continent, particularly in Italy, were, had the ZF dogleg gearbox, which was a very good gearbox actually. It could handle a lot of power. That was its main feature. So things like Aston Martin used them for the V8s, which was quite a big torquey engine. Lots of manufacturers used them. Maserati used them, and of course Fiat. And it's a good box. It's called the dogleg because first gear is off on a limb, like that. But let's just, let's just savour that 130 V6 semi-race bred noise again. Not a bad day in the office, this for me, I have to say. Having the luxury of being able to relive memories from 40 years ago. This is wonderful. Well, here we are in an empty warehouse, just like a set from The Professionals in the 1970s. When London was just full of empty, disused buildings and warehouses. So we're going to try and get that wonderful V6 race-bred sound. So here goes. Well, here I am ensconced in acres of 1970s bright orange Draylon and loving every second of it. But unfortunately, the video has to come to an end. Thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this little piece of sort of off-field Italian craftsmanship, and we'll be back with something else very soon.